Thank you for the question. Basically, government infighting. Harvey, let's start with you.
Well, we need to remember what it is we're trying to accomplish, which is a standard of living that we like within the Earth's means. And we need to have layers of government that address their various areas of jurisdiction under the Constitution. What now we have is a federal government that's abdicating its responsibility to water in Canada. There is no more important thing than intact riparian systems for biodiversity, for freshwater supply, and for the ability to adapt to climate change. And 2 weeks ago, the federal government stripped away decades-old protection for streams in an omnibus budget bill. This is a catastrophe for Canada. And it ranks up there with the omnibus budget bill last May when they stripped away environmental assessment requirements. And what is going on is that we are diminishing our ability to do good environmental management. And jurisdictional issues only come up when there's incoherence. You can have different levels of things that are coherent. There's no inherent problem with municipal, federal, provincial, international, let's not forget, jurisdiction around water, the sky. It's a question of whether you want to make it work or not. And our federal government, and frankly, I'm not running against my two neighbors here, I'm running against the people making the mess in Ottawa. That's the issue. And those people do not understand that the environment is not an externality. It is not a cost. It is the context for our life. We need to restore a sense of trying to protect nature, protect the air, the atmosphere, and achieve the economic activities we want. And we need to find a way to cooperate across jurisdictions to get there, including permitting and regulation. It's really simple, and I don't know what happened, but our federal government got some kind of I forgot my constitutional law textbook, lobotomy, and they don't talk to the provinces anymore. They demolish environmental laws, and then they call people who are questioning their decisions enemies of the public interest.
Thank you, Harvey.
Wow.
Sorry to cut you off. That's a lobotomy of questions, I guess. Chris Turner, you have the floor.
Well, first of all, I absolutely agree that the federal government's role in this is leadership and coherence, and it has failed on both fronts. And the omnibus budget bill last year, earlier this year, is a terrific example of how powerful a single MP can be if that MP is free to really make that one seat work. Elizabeth May and her staff wrote more than 300 amendments to the omnibus budget bill, not because they thought they would be able to stop it from getting passed, but because that way at least Canadians would know what was happening inside that bill. And buried inside that bill was a staggering dismantling of Canada's environmental monitoring and research facilities, a staggering abrogation of responsibility for leadership on the environment. So how do we begin to have a conversation about the relationship between jurisdictions is by restoring the leadership that the federal government has to take. There's certain things only it can do. Things like basic scientific research that applies to all Canadians. Things like monitoring of essential ecosystems that apply to all Canadians. Right now, we do in fact have a government. We're not running against each other on this. We have a government that has openly declared war on basic science, and it needs to be reversed as soon as possible. And I think that Elizabeth May has already demonstrated how powerfully a single Green MP can do that, and two of us would be doubly powerful. Thanks.
Dan Meads, the question is on jurisdiction. You have 2 minutes.
For the last 3.5 years, I've been the executive director of Vibrant Communities Calgary. What we do is we work with governments, nonprofits, the business community, and people living in poverty to come up with solutions that make all of our communities better, safer, and more fair for everybody. We do that with the municipal government, with the provincial government, and with the federal government. And oftentimes, we get to do it with all three at the same time on the same issue. I have a track record of bringing people from different orders of government together to enact change that's going to be the best for our society and for our communities. When we think about environmental regulation, that's the federal government's role. We want rigorous, credible, and thorough regulations to make sure that all of the projects that are happening at provincial and municipal levels fit the bill for the rest of the country. Having said that, resource development is provincial jurisdiction, and it isn't the federal government's job to insist on how those resources should be developed. It is the federal government's role to ensure, however, as I said, that we have rigorous, thorough, and credible regulations to make sure that none of those developments are going to negatively impact our communities. Municipally, we have an interesting thing that happens as well. Our municipal governments aren't given the control that they need and aren't given the freedom to make our cities as great as they could be. As that relates to environmental issues in the same way that it does everything else. Public transit's a great example, and so our federal government needs a national transit strategy that would allow our municipalities to do the work that they want to do. Olivia Chow has a great national transit strategy bill before the House. That's the type of work that the federal government can do to empower provincial and municipal governments to make real change on environmental issues.